Section 2.6 is on evolution adaptation. So as you probably know, the theory of natural selection was developed by Charles Darwin. He didn't use the word evolution exactly. He didn't even coin the term survival of the fittest, but he did have the idea of natural selection. That was back in 1859. Darwin's two major concepts were a fitness of an individual, and that was the individual's ability to survive and reproduce. And then any adaptation that individual had, a behavior or physical characteristic that increased their fitness. So his main ideas boil down to three major concepts. The first is that there is a struggle for existence among organisms. We've seen this already in that resources are limited, right? There aren't enough nutrients for everything to grow as much as it wants to. And so species are always competing against each other, either for resources or to, get resources, right? The lynx is chasing the hare here. So the hare wants to survive. The lynx wants to survive by eating the hare. Within living organisms, there are variations that are both physical and behavioral. So this is even within species, right? If you see these pictures of the dogs, right, there are variations within the dogs, although those are not naturally selected variations. Within people, there are lots of different variations. Although we are all human, we're all the same species. Sometimes we have different skin color, different hair color, heights, different physical abilities, different mental abilities, different behavioral abilities. So there's lots of different variation. Consequently, individuals that have higher fitness that allow them to survive and reproduce are more likely to survive. And this was later described by a different scientist as the survival of the fittest. So what happens over time is that natural selection ensures that certain characteristics appear more often within a species until they define that species. So for example, over time, animals that started out with 4 legs and tails evolved to different animals. So animals that might have been out walking on land in the air, evolved back into water-dwelling animals. That fish were the original water-dwelling animals that evolved into air-breathing animals. But then some animals found it advantageous to become water-dwelling animals again. Now, I give them agency that they don't actually have, right? No conscious decision was made by these species to change. But species had these adaptations that turned out to be advantageous, which eventually, they passed on to their offspring until their offspring were, an entirely new species. So there are a couple of different ways to describe this. So common descent or descent with modification, where there's some original species, millions, tens, hundreds of millions of years ago that are related to existing species, and that the existing species have changed from those original species over time. So descent with modification describes how characteristics are common among species, but then the modification describes how those original species have changed. You can consider evolution, or I should say natural selection, summed up by 3 statements. So if you take a subject on the left and put it with a verb on the right, you'll come up with these 3 statements. So maybe pause the video for a moment. All right, so what 3 statements did you come up with? Well, the first thing that has to happen is that genes have to mutate. And then those mutations allow individuals to survive and reproduce. And then as those individuals reproduce more, the populations evolve. It's important to note that populations evolve. Individual organisms, all they can do is survive and reproduce. And it's the genes themselves that mutate. So individuals do not evolve. That's not a thing. So what is it that makes humans so successful in that we've been able to spread across the globe, across many different habitats, and survive in all sorts of conditions? Um, well, compared to most other animals, we can see farther, and we have limbs that we can use to grab things, specifically limbs with opposable thumbs, right? Really, almost no other animal has anything like it. And then finally, compared to our body, like our brains are extremely large, like our ratio of brain to body is much higher than pretty much most other animals. And that allows us to solve problems that other animals are not able to. So what are our new environmental conditions? So, we talk about climate change being a threat to humanity. Well, humans can't just evolve to deal with climate change. The fact is that genes for evolution have to already be present in the population. So we can't just create new and better humans that can handle a warmer Earth. Um, the other issue is that our generation times are very long, right? Our generations are anywhere from 20 to 40 years, and we're changing conditions much faster than that, right? Even just in the last 150 years, which would be maybe 6 generations, isn't enough time to evolve, um, our species. We need thousands of years to evolve. One of the issues with natural selection evolution is that there are a lot of myths about it. Things that are just strictly untrue. So let's talk about a couple of these. The idea that fitness is strongest, fastest, or biggest, right? The dinosaurs were all strong, fast, or big, and that did not help them survive. At least, it did not help them survive a major extinction. Um, the idea that organisms develop new traits in order to help them survive. In fact, the new traits are random. And so what happens is that random mutations occur, and if the environment selects for those mutations, right, if they turn out to be helpful to an organism, that organism reproduces and passes its mutation on to its offspring, and then they survive better and reproduce. So no organism changes itself in order to survive better. Finally, the idea that evolution is a progression towards an ideal. The fact is that evolution is essentially random, right? That the genes that the genes that exist are random mutations. The environment is not random, right? You can predict what kinds of mutations will be beneficial in what kinds of environments, right? In a snow environment, a brown fur is not going to be an advantageous mutation. But the fact is that there's not an ideal. Evolution is a natural process, that's not guided by some outside force. Um, so yeah, there it is. Some processes that you might not have realized effective evolution, or you might not have made the connection. And for, I keep harping back on, how can we connect our different units, right? Consider geological processes that affect evolution. Of course, the location of continents are a big deal, whether they are in, lower latitudes or higher latitudes will affect the kinds of flora and fauna that can survive there. The movement of continents allows for speciation. Right, when continents are connected, then the species are going to be more similar to each other, but as they move apart, different populations are going to evolve differently. And that also allows for extinction, right? A population that might have been on Gondwana land when split up into Africa and South America and Antarctica, a population on Antarctica would probably die out because it's too cold, while a different population survives in Africa. Sometimes we see earthquakes isolating populations, which leads to speciation. Volcanoes, of course, can destroy habitat, cause extinction. And then, as I alluded to earlier, asteroid impacts. Well, technically not geology, more astronomy, can cause widespread extinction. Now, climate change, of course, can affect evolution. Ice ages happen on a fairly fast scale as compared to the evolution of species, where ice ages can happen on the scale of tens of thousands of years, where evolution often takes, millions of years. So whether the planet is colder than average or warmer than average, or really colder than it has been recently or warmer than it has been recently, will cause populations to migrate, cause populations to go extinct, and to create new niches for different populations. That is section 2.6. Let me know if you have any questions.